just introduce you?
Yeah, we'll have the address.
Hey, everyone. Hey. Hey. How's it going, everybody? Thanks for coming out. If you don't know me, my name's Pat Hasberg. My wife Ashley and I own DNS here. We recently just made it a year, so pretty happy about that. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Yeah. Very happy to keep this tradition of the seminar series, winter and spring seminars going. So I appreciate you all coming out. And we have Austin Ragotzkie here. He's going to be talking about walleyes on hair. So Walleye Flies, Walleye hair jigs. And Austin is a very talented guide, does ice guiding in the area in the winter, a lot of time on the Rock River, and you on the Wisconsin or?
Not so much in Wisconsin, Green Bay.
Green Bay,
Yep.
yeah. And then you run a charter in the summer, is that right?
Correct, yep.
Yeah.
Salmon charter in the summer.
Yeah, so
Then
yeah.
squeeze the National Walleye Tour in there.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Never ends.
Tournament angler
Yep.
as well. Yeah. So yeah, he gets around and he's very, very knowledgeable. And so yeah, appreciate you all coming out and let's give it up for Austin.
Don't look at me. What's up, guys? All right, so like Pat said, I'm Austin Ragotzkie. I don't know, some of you guys look familiar, some of you guys don't, but we're gonna do everything hair tonight for walleyes. So we're gonna do flies and we're gonna do hair jigs. I'm just gonna kind of split it and do I'm gonna do flies for the first half and then we'll do hair jigs for the second half. And I'm gonna cover the what, where, when, why, how on both of them. And then the hair jigging, the rigging is pretty straightforward. The fly rigging, I'm gonna kind of demonstrate it, but then at the end, anybody who wants to see how to really set up that rig, just come up and I'll tie one up and you guys can it's gonna be easier to watch me do it than to try and explain it, if that makes sense. So we're gonna start with flies. So the key to walleye flies, right, bucktail. You can look in the store if you're buying different flies, and guys will make them out of different stuff. You'll see, some marabou stuff, some synthetic fur stuff. It all might catch a fish or two, but really to be effective, real bucktail hair is the key. Bucktail hair, for most of you guys that don't know, it's hollow, right? So there's like an air pocket inside that piece of hair. That's what makes it work so well. Is so basically when you cut that hair off a bucktail and tie it on a fly, I'm going to show this too. This is what you're looking for when you're buying flies, because some people do it right and some people do not. Kurt, who ties all the flies that Pat is selling here, does it right. I had the pleasure of fishing with Kurt, was that Friday? Yep, he makes good flies. We were using them that day and catching plenty of fish on them. So when you go into the store, so when you tie a hair jig or a fly, right, you're going to take your bucktail and you're going to grab a chunk of hair and you cut it off. You lay it on here so that the chunk that you cut, like the end where you cut with your scissors, is the end that gets tied on. So then your hair, because the way hair naturally tapers at the end of a tail, is going to end up in different lengths. So that's what creates the profile. It might look really kind of poofed out like this when it's dry, but as soon as you get that hair wet and put some water pressure on it and pull it through the water, now it all tapers together and it creates that profile of a bait fish. So when you're in the store and you're looking for a fly, and you'll see people do this, and they'll basically tie their fly or their hair jig and they'll tie it on and then they'll cut it. Just right there. You just ruined it. It's junk. Don't buy it. So it does two things. One, it opens up the end of the hair, so now all that hair gets waterlogged. You lose that air pocket, so now it's just dead. And then it looks like a triangle, not a fish. So that's the first thing you're looking for. Do you have paper towels or an eraser?
Sure. Yeah.
I can keep going with my fingers too, but
here.
That'll work perfect. Thank you. This is tip number 1 for a fly. When we fish flies, you can do it 2 ways. You can cast them, or you can do what guys call pulling them, which is essentially kind of like trolling. Like you're just using your trolling motor to, make headway while you're holding the rod in your hand and just kind of pumping it. It kind of depends on the river system that you're in, but both ways work. To catch walleyes on flies, you need 2 things. You need walleyes, you need current. It is a river game. The heavier the current, the better. When you're in an area that's like real slack water, not so much fly water. Now you're looking more hair jig type stuff. But that like mid-channel, heavier current, that's where your flies are going to excel. Now when you rig them, whether you're pulling them or casting them, you're going to rig it pretty much the same way. So, and like I said, I'll go over this later in more detail up here for anyone who wants to see how to do it. I'm not an artist. Here's your rod. You got your main line. I like to use braid, usually 10-pound braid. I like Suffix 832, but Power Pro, whatever. It's all good. I like to do it. Everyone's going to tell you to use a 3-way. I don't. That's just personal preference. I think it's less tangles. But I just use a regular 2-way barrel swivel. So from your 10-pound braid main line, and this is whether you're pulling or casting, I like 10-pound braid. Because it's just in that heavier current, that thinner braid's going to cut the water better. So you're just going to have a better angle down to your weight, not so much drag. Your braid to your leading edge of your barrel swivel. Then from that same eye on your barrel swivel is your dropper to your weight. We like to use like pencil sinkers. You can buy them in all sorts of different weights. What I do is I buy all 1-ouncers, and then I keep a wire cutters in the boat. And then if throughout the day I need less, you can just trim off lead with the wire cutters. Make it whatever length and weight you want. Then off the back end of your barrel swivel, you're going to run, and this doesn't really matter for line. I use the same that I use for my flies, which is 10-pound mono. Some guys like to use less, so if you snag the weight, it'll break off quicker than your flies will, but usually it's your flies that snag and not the weight. So I just use the same leader I'm using for my flies because it's already in my hand. So for your flies, 10-pound mono. Mono is key. Don't use fluoro. Mono floats. Fluorocarbon sinks. So if you use mono, it's going to float those flies up off the bottom. If you use fluoro, it's going to sink, drag bottom, it's going to collect. You're going to get gunk and leaves and get snagged a lot more. So this is usually, I'd say anywhere from 6 to 18 inches. If the water's super dirty, I'm going to run my dropper more in that 6 to 8 inch range. Start getting into clearer water, I'm more in that 10 to 18. Like it seems like if I can run it higher up off the bottom, it's better. But when the water's real dirty and those fish are, glued down and the visibility isn't there, you got to run it lower. Because whatever you make this, dictates the height that your flies are going to be up off the bottom. Then for your leader to your flies, 10-pound, get in there, mono. I like Trilene XL. You can do it with XT, but it gets a little tricky to put this first fly on. And I'll show you why. I always run 2 flies on a leader. I've seen guys do it with 3. To me, it's more of a headache than it's worth. So I'll make this usually about 4 to 6 feet if I'm casting. 6 to 10 feet if I'm pulling them.
And what's the reason for that, the difference?
The longer leader, sometimes you can spread out your 2 flies more, and I think it's just maybe a little more effective for getting bites, but you cannot cast a 10-foot leader. So that's why, shorter. Yep.
Unless you got a longer rod.
Exactly. You can do it, but the guy behind you is going to be pissed the third time you get him, with that second fly. So figure, let's just call this like 4 to 6 feet. I mean, honestly, I grab my spool and I go like that. perfect every time. Your back fly, tied on, just normal. Whatever knot, fisherman's knot, Palomar, whatever you want to do. Your mid fly, which I like to put pretty much directly right in the middle, so between your back fly and your barrel swivel, what you do is you take your whole piece there and you make a loop. Like literally just take the line, fold it over, overhand knot, loop. You want the loop to be, I don't know, what would you call that, 3 inches? We're gonna call it 3 inches, 3 to 4 inches.
Basically long enough to get for your fly to go through.
Correct.
When you put it through the other.
Do it. Do it 2 times. So you're gonna do your overhand knot, make a loop, then do another overhand knot and tighten it down so it's double. If you just do one, it'll hold 90% of the time, but you'll get snagged or hook into a big fish and that knot will slip and it can pull that loop tight. So if you do it twice, it'll stay, it'll never move. And then the reason we do the loop is so basically you can take this loop now and you can pinch the 2 ends of it together, take your fly, stick those 2 ends pinched together through the eye of the hook, pull it around the back of the hook and cinch it tight. And then it's just an easy way to do it, and your front fly is removable. So if like 20 minutes you want to change colors, you can just loosen that up, take it off, put a different one on. It works slick. And then your back fly, you know, if you want to change your back fly, you just cut it, but I usually wait until like, if I cut out about a foot of it and it gets to like here, then I'll scrap the whole thing and redo it if I got to cut it again. But that front fly, so usually what I'll do is my back fly, I'll put on like, if one fly's been good like all week, I'm gonna put that fly on my back because I know it's probably gonna stay there. And then the front fly, I'll experiment with because you can change it.
Key point there, Austin, and I did this on Friday. When you put your loop through, go top to bottom.
Oh, yep.
Because I just put mine on bottom to top. Seemed easier. And I go, Austin, why's my fly float swimming white hair up?
Yeah, so if you take that loop and go from like the bottom up, your fly will end up upside down on your loop. If you go top down, so like take the loop, put it top down, and then over the back and around, it'll be right side up.
That's a key.
I don't know why. You wouldn't think it would really make a difference. You'd think it would just kind of flop around, but it's consistently, like if you go top down, it's right. So, are you guys good with the basics of this? And like I said, I'm gonna tie this later, so if you wanna see how to do it, just come up and we'll do it. So where do you throw flies? I guess you need 2 things. You need current and you need walleyes. So let's say this is our river. You got your current. So like, how many of you guys trout fish? Like trout fish. So like trout in a river are gonna like seek out like an eddy, right? Like slack water. Walleyes are weird, they don't do, like, take that back, sometimes they do it. But most of the time your pre-spawn walleyes are gonna be right in the gut of the current. It seems dumb, right? Like they're just wasting energy. But the majority of your fish, like 90% of your small to medium sized fish and almost all your males, like, you know, let's say the current's going this way, they're gonna stack up in like deeper runs, we're talking pre-spawn, like just right down the middle. I mean, there's just gonna be pods of them.
So in the middle or in the fallow?
Like-
Part of the chain.
Like literally, I mean, let's say it's like 5 feet here, 12 in the middle, 8 here. They're gonna stay right in that gut, right in that 12. You're gonna have fish, you know, sometimes the pods are so big that they're gonna stretch up onto that shallower stuff, but the bulk of your pod is gonna, now we're talking like below 40 degrees, like pre-spawn stuff, right? like where they're just kind of working up, stopping, keep going, stop. You know, they're still on their way up. So what I'm going to do, and when I'm looking for a place to fish, is I'm going to start cruising upriver with the boat. I like to look for fish upriver, not downriver, because I can go slower and I get a better image on my side scan. So all I'm doing when I'm looking for places to fish, I'm side imaging them. You can do it going down, but it seems like when you're talking like those 14 to 18, 19-inch walleyes, and they're in like some gravel or some riprap, it's hard to see them sometimes on side scan if you're going like 6, 7 miles an hour. But if you're going like 3 or 4 into the current, you can break it down a lot better. So I'm just going to be cruising upriver with my boat. I'm going to start side scanning pods of fish. You know, I'll kind of work. If I'm coming here and I see this pod of fish, but I know there's probably more pods up, I'm not going to stop yet. I'm just going to do that one, keep going, keep going. I'll cover maybe a mile. Okay, where was the biggest? You know what I mean? Where's the best? I'll go back to that spot. Let's say I'm going to fish this pod of fish. So I'm coming up this way in the boat. I start marking them. You know, when the boat's right here, I'm starting to see them. Keep going. Right when it starts to dry up, that's where I'm going to stop. I'm going to spot lock right there. And then, like let's say if all the fish are in the middle, I'm not going to get right in the middle. I'm going to stay maybe 10 to 40 feet off to one side of them. It doesn't matter which side. Whatever side you want to stay on. So let's say I'm going to stay right there. You always want to be on the upstream side of the pot of fish. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cast, and this is for casting, not pulling. I'm going to cast either straight across the current or down at any angle up to like a 45. Your rig is going to hit the water, and you're going to immediately, as soon as that weight hits the water, flip your bail closed, hold the rod high, tip high. And don't reel, don't do anything. Don't let it hit the water, open your bail, and keep feeding it slack. Just close the bail right away, hold it. It's going to take a minute to sink because everything's tight, but that's what you want. Wait till you feel that weight hit the bottom, and then once you get bottom contact, I'm just going to do a series of pops, and essentially what I'm doing is, this is the bottom, right? This is your rig to your 2 flies. All I'm doing when I tell people this all the time on guide trips, I think it helps. Instead of like focusing on what you're doing with the rod, try and envision in your head what that bait is doing. What you're trying to do is make this weight lift up and move off the bottom, like literally like 3 inches. You want it to just go like that. I mean, you don't want it coming off the bottom any more than that far. And you're just going to keep doing that. And if you picture like, okay, I want that weight to move like 3 inches, your brain will just kind of like do what it needs to do with the rod. If you try and like think about how much am I moving the rod, it gets, you know, it gets tougher, I feel like. And what you're essentially doing by moving that is you're just keeping it moving. So it landed here, and what it's going to do is it's going to make this sweep through those fish until it's directly down current from where you are in the boat. A lot of times you'll get your bite on that sweep, and then once it gets directly downstream from you, then I'm just going to go low with the rod off to one side of the boat, and I'm just going to pop it, reel in the slack. Do it again. And then you're just going to bring it straight back up to the boat. If you'll notice throughout the day, depending on where the fish are and what kind of mood they're in, you'll be getting more on the sweep or more bringing it back up to the boat. I think more than where the fish are, it's the difference in cadence, right? It's going across their face in front of them, and then it's just coming from behind them and going straight up current. Some days they like this more, some days they like the sweep more. So I start, like I'll do the whole process and bring it all the way up to the boat, and I'll do that for a while. And then when you start getting kind of dialed in on what's working better, then by the end of the day, I might only be casting, you know, to here. So it's just a real short sweep because I'm getting all my bites on the way back to the boat. If I'm getting all my bites on this part of my swing, I might be casting outer at a, you know, just a slight angle. And by the time it gets back down behind the boat, I'm going to burn it in and redo it because I know I'm not getting bites on that part. So that's just one of those things that kind of changes and you play with on a daily basis. When it's sweeping down, it's key to maintain that line like as tight as you can to the weight. Because if you start like dropping your rod tip or getting lazy and you start getting slack in there, that current going downstream is going to create, you know, like a big bow in your line. And then what happens is your weight is going to start getting pulled downstream at like a sharp angle because that current is like pulling a bow on the line. That's when you're going to start having problems snagging your weight, and you're not going to feel bites because you're going to have so much sponginess and a bow in your line that fish could be biting, and you just have no idea. You keep that rod tip high and make sure you have no slack, and you keep it tight, and it's going to keep a steeper angle on that weight to the bottom, and you're just going to have a lot more direct contact to the whole rig, and you're going to feel everything a lot better. And you're going to just inherently, bites that are on their way back to the boat, or you're going to feel a lot better than bites that are out here. Just because you're going to always have a little bow in your line from the current, you're not going to be able to eliminate all of it. And so a lot of the fish out here, I'd say even half of them sometimes, you don't even feel the bite. You're just going to go to pull it the next time, and it's heavy. Hook sets are free, send it. Good chance it's probably a fish. When you're pulling it back to the boat, most of the time you're going to feel them cream it.
How long do you fish that spot then? Do they stop biting and just get a new school?
Yeah, depending on, so if I pull up to a spot where I'm marking them and I don't get a bite in 5 casts, I'm gone. Like if they're bitey and they're walleye, because sometimes you might have just marked a giant pot of sheephead, you know. So, but if they're walleyes and they're gonna play, it's usually like within the first 3 casts. It's quick. And then I feel like it's always the best right away. You're gonna pick off the most active fish. And then you could stay there all day depending on some of the spots, and fish will just keep recycling and you'll catch some. But you'll definitely pick off those active ones like immediately. And then what I'll usually do is if I know it was like a real big pot of fish and where I'm spot locked in my boat, I know that where I'm casting, you know, there's still a lot more below where I am. Then what I'm gonna do is like, I'm gonna cast it, let's say it's a fish every other cast, and then it turns into like a fish every 15 minutes. You know, like you're still getting a couple bites, but it's slowed down. All I'm gonna do is take my spot lock off. I'm just gonna slide back like the distance that I was casting, do it again. And then now we're gonna start the same process, and now we're into a whole new batch of fish. And then I'll just keep doing that until all of a sudden, okay, now we're not getting them anymore. Wrap it up. Now we're gonna go find a different pot of fish. There's sections of river that, you know, like especially the Rock River, like the lower Rock River, where there might be like 2 miles of just like solid fish. And you can just start at the top and just work your way through it. The one thing to keep in mind when you're casting flies, especially like Wisconsin River, Rock River, the Wolf, you're gonna have a lot of boats like drifting and vertical jigging, right, in the current. Don't be the guy that spot locks in the middle. Like it's, you know, it's not cool for you because you're not gonna be able to cast. There's gonna be boats on both sides of you. It's not cool for these guys because you're kind of screwing up the whole show. Honestly, so like, don't do it because it kind of just wrecks the whole program. And don't do it because honestly, when you stay off to the side of them and you get that swing through them, you're gonna catch more fish. So, but it definitely does, you know, I've seen people do it, like they'll see us catching fish and then they'll mark them and they'll get out and they'll do it right in the middle. And there's been some heated exchanges of words.
Before you race that, talk about maybe moving to the other side of the stream, and so you're casting at a different.
Oh yeah, yeah.
angle.
So sometimes like if it slows down, you know, if you just hop, right, to the other side and you do that same swing from across, I don't know if it's so much changing the angle kind of reactivates some of those fish, or like let's say, you know, your boat's here and you got fish like right here, you know, you're kind of like, even though they're in your zone, you're kind of just like overshooting them. And then you go to the other side and now it's kind of like a whole new batch. So that's, sometimes I'll do that too. I'll flip sides. If it's a real long pot of fish, I usually won't even bother with it. I'll just keep sliding down. But if it's like a shorter section, then I'll do the flip. Give it a little bit.
Austin, what's the percentage of your bites between the leading fly or the lagging?
Changes every day. I would say if I averaged it all out, it's honestly pretty 50-50. Yep. But I would say earlier in the year, like right away when the ice goes out, I feel like I get more on the front fly. And I think it's because it moves less. I think it's just closer to the weight.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just not doing this as much. It's just kind of sitting there. And when that water's colder, I think kind of less is more. But yeah, I catch plenty of them on the back fly then too. But I would say it slightly favors the front fly. But then the rest of the year, when you start getting closer to spawn and like post spawn, I would say it comes down to like if I have a red fly on the front and a purple fly on the back, and that purple fly is getting smoked, and I swap them, it's good. They're going to hit it on the front as good as they hit it on the back. And you will catch two at a time. It happens often enough. But one thing I didn't really hit on much was like cadence when you're popping it. Like you're always just doing that slight like 3-inch lift with those weights, but the speed and like the rhythm of how fast you're doing it definitely changes. So, and I wouldn't even say that changes as much with like time of year as it does just day to day. I've had days in 35-degree water right after ice out where I'm like, as soon as I feel that weight make bottom contact again, I'm immediately popping it again. I'm just moving it the whole time. And then I've had days where you have to pop it, stop, and then just let it sit there for probably, 4 seconds. And like 3 seconds into that pause, they'll cream it. But I've had days when the water's 55 degrees and they wanted it sitting there for 4 seconds. So it's just, I don't know if that's just a weather thing, mood of the fish, but definitely the more off they are, the longer you want to let it sit there. You'd be amazed how much, there's probably days you could just take a rod with 2 flies and put it in a rod holder and just put it on the bottom in the current behind your boat and just put it there and turn away. I bet you in 10 minutes it'd catch fish. Because those flies, when they sit in the current, they're always just kind of doing this a little bit, and that hair is kind of breathing and doing that. And so just sitting there in the current is what gets them to bite. So when you're popping it, you're not so much inducing the action that's making them bite as much as you're just moving it so you keep covering water. And it's just that hair kind of moving in the current on its own that's getting those bites. And in terms of weight, it's a 1 ounce sinker is probably the biggest I'll use for casting. Err on the side of heavy. You want that weight when you snap and it hits the bottom again. If you don't do anything, you don't really want to feel that weight like rolling, on the bottom, like the current is sweeping it. Like if you got a 1/2 ounce on and you're out there and you stop moving it and you feel that thing just constantly dragging, you need to up it another 1/4 or 1/2 ounce. You're not going to really get it to completely stick there and not move. You will when you're straight behind the boat, but when you're off to the side and it's sweeping back behind your boat, you want it to sit there for at least a second or two. If it's just immediately getting swept down, it's not enough weight. And I would say it's very rare that I'm below a 1/2 ounce. I'm saying I'm 1/2, 3/4, or 1 ounce, 90% of the time. So heavy, you'll still catch fish if you're too heavy. If you're too light and it's moving too fast, you're not going to get bites because it's not sitting there long enough for them to take it.
Do you ever put a heavy jig instead of the weight?
Sometimes. I used to do it more. So yeah, take that same, so if I do that, I'll go to 1 fly. 2 flies and a jig is a recipe for disaster. I've tried it so many times and within an hour you're redoing that rig and you're swearing and it doesn't work. But the one jig and the 1 fly rig will work, but I found myself the last couple years doing it less and less because in order to get that jig to work, you have to snap a totally different cadence than I would with a weight on there. And then you're kind of shorting yourself on the fly end of it. So I found when I do it, I'll work it like I'm working a jig, not like I'm working a fly. And then you'll catch a few fish on the fly, but at that point you're pretty much just fishing the jig, but you're not fishing it as effectively as you would with just the jig because you can't snap it as hard. So I kind of, now and then I'll still throw one on there just to try it, but it's not really my favorite way to do it.
What about just a bare hook with a live minnow in place of one of the flies?
I've done it. It doesn't, there's something about the way a minnow on a hook goes through the water compared to like a streamer fly. It kind of changes the whole rhythm of the rig. and it just kind of kills. Like if I'm gonna fish a minnow on a 3-way like that, I'm just gonna do a long lead to the hook in the minnow. But that fly in the middle there just kind of, you know, it just doesn't like swing the same, and that the fly just won't work the same way it will. It's really, it doesn't make much sense, but it just doesn't work. You can even feel it. Like there's a lot more drag from a minnow on a hook than there is from a fly. And you'll, like when you're doing it, you'll feel like it just feels spongy and heavy, and it doesn't feel the same. Now, there is guys that will put minnows on their flies, not when you're casting them, but when you're pulling them, when the fish get like super moody, like can't get a bite moody. Like I think a couple guys at the first AIM tournament, not the AIM tournament, the Swamp Donkey tournament in De Pere, I think like 4 of the top 10 were pulling flies with minnows on them. So we're talking like muddy water, super cold front, like you're praying for like a bite every 3 hours type conditions. You can pull out all the stops and put a minnow on your. But when the fish are acting like they're supposed to act, you're gonna catch way more fish without the minnows just because you can cover water so much quicker and cycle through them. And then like the best part about hair, right, when you're throwing flies, it's like if you're jigging minnow in the spring and like, you know, you're going right through like your favorite spot, you get a bite and you miss it. Well, now you pull up, grab another minnow out of the bucket, put it on, send it back down. By the time you're back in the game, you went like 20 yards and you're already past like most of your goods. You know what I mean? And with the flies, like I'll make a cast. It's not uncommon to have like 6 bites on a cast before you hook one. So it's like you're halfway through your swing. Oh, that was a bite, missed him. Well, who cares? Keep going. Oh, there's an, okay, got him. You know, so it's like, it's just effective because you're fishing all the time. You're not wasting any time like pulling in, rebait, recast. Your bait's just always working. So when it comes to pulling, I don't pull a lot. I do it sometimes, but not a ton. It's hard to do if there's like, if it's like really busy, like if you got 100 guys, you know, drifting and vertical jigging, you can do it, but it gets dicey, you know, snaking your way between everyone's boats. You kind of got to pick your days for pulling. Pulling is more popular. You get to like the Wolf, right? The pulling is super popular on the Wolf, right? In Oshkosh, Rainbow Park, there guys do it a lot. It works on the Rock too. I like casting just because I like to cast, but pulling is pretty much just as effective some days. So current's coming down. Let's just say you got fish in this whole section and you're pulling. You're going upstream with your boat. And it always kind of varies depending on, you know, the speed and the depth of the current. But I would say your target zone most of the time is on the low end. I'm literally talking like 0.1 miles an hour. Like it's disgusting. Like you look at shore in an hour and I move like the length of this room. Like it's up to about, I'd say like that 0.7, 0.8 on the fast end. I'd say you're usually in that 0.25 to like 0.5 would be like your typical range for pulling. Same rig when you're pulling, although if you want to run 3 flies, pulling is the time to do it. Because as soon as you cast 3 flies, sometimes it gets wrapped up on you in the air and turns into a mess. Pulling, you don't have to cast, you're just dropping it down. So if you wanted to screw around with running 3, you can do it. I found no difference running 2 to 3 for the amount of bites I get. I feel like if I got 2 flies on that leader or 3 flies, and I go past a couple fish that are going to eat, they're going to bite one of those 2 just as much as they bite one of the 3. So I wouldn't say it catches less fish, but I haven't seen it catch any more. That to me, it's worth tying the 3rd one on there. And then when you do snag and break off, you're pissed because you lost 3 instead of 2. Most guys, when they pull, are just going to pretty much do a straight line upstream. I like to zigzag pretty hard. And when I zigzag when I pull, I didn't break it today.
Hopefully
When you see most people zigzag when they're pulling, they're kind of doing this. It works. You're definitely covering more water than if you were just going straight. I like to do hard turns. So like, I'll pretty much 45 it, and then I will turn my trolling motor 90 degrees. And I'm like just complete 90-degree turns. And you will get so many fish on those 90-degree turns. Because when you turn hard, right, you're completely slacking. Almost, you're like the flies on this side of the boat are actually probably dropping back downriver, whereas your flies on the upriver side speed up. When you're doing the mellow turns, you're getting that effect a little bit, but with flies, like, you're not worried about, it's not like a crankbait where you're really careful about, like, oh, if it touches the bottom, it's going to get weeds or it's going to get, you know what I mean? You kind of have to be more careful about how you're doing it. You can get pretty aggressive with the flies because they float pretty well on that mono leader, and you'd be amazed with those, like, single white wire hooks. They just really don't, you don't get hung up a lot. So when you can make those super hard aggressive turns and this side drops back and this side just rips forward, I mean, some days that just drives them nuts. Some days it doesn't matter and you're just consistently getting them the whole time. But there's definitely days when those hard 90 corner turns are key. And then if you get into a spot where, like, all of a sudden they're just like, you know, there's just 10 times the fish that there was, you know, like there's scattered fish the whole thing, but there's just piles of them right here. Don't be afraid to just, like, what I'll do is I'll spot lock and I'll just pump the fly in the same spot for like 5 minutes. And then I'll turn my power on again at 0.2, 0.3. I'll go like 5 feet, spot lock again, pump it for like 5 minutes. There's times I've literally sat in one spot for like 10 minutes, pump, you got one, right? Pull it in, I'll drop it back down, pump it, like just sitting there. They'll annihilate if they're fired up. So don't feel like if you get in like a really good spot, don't feel like you gotta just go through it and come back. You can stop there, and some days it doesn't work. So just give it 5 or 10 minutes. If it's working, just sit there as long as you can. You know what I mean? If it's not working, turn the power back on, just keep going. The fly thing works, I would say, very effectively up to like that 60-degree watermark. So from right after the ice goes out all the way to like, I don't know, middle of May, it's like super effective. You can catch them on it all year. I mean, I've done it in July, August, it works. But I think, you know, you get to that point in the season, I think a larger profile presentation just gets better, right? But it's not, you know, a lot of guys think it's just a pre-spawn thing or it's just a post-spawn thing. Like, I know, like the Bago guys don't like to do it early. They wait until they're like post-spawn coming back down. That's when they start pumping flies. A lot of like the Rock and Wisconsin River guys think it's a pre-spawn thing. And once they're post-spawn coming down, they kind of quit doing it. It works. I don't know who started those rumors, but it works equally well, you know, before, during, and after the spawn. Just keep doing it. They're going to move. You know, your fish are going to, you know, be in completely different water, but they're still going to bite the flies. It works so good on like spawning fish. Like when they're up in like, you know, that 5 to 8 foot like shallow gravel and they're like actually spawning, it's super effective because I think you just get such a reaction bite out of them because you can hang it in their face for so long. Like you can just, you know, if you know you got fish on shallow gravel right here and you can like put your boat right here and swing that through and you can just pump that fly in front of that fish like 15 times. Eventually he's like, God damn it. And he just freaking eats it. I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that flies is the best big fish technique in the world. It's not. It's a numbers game. You want to just go out and catch 100 fish, flies the answer. You'll catch big fish on flies. But like if it was a tournament and I needed 5 5-pounders, I'm probably not throwing flies. I'm going to be throwing big plastics, big hair jigs, something like that. I'm going to get a lot less bites, but you know, flies just in general don't target big fish. In the right scenarios, you will get the big ones to eat it, but it's just not that kind of a presentation. It's a numbers game. You want to just go out and catch the most fish you can catch, flies, for sure. Let me see what time I got here so I don't lose track. It's pretty much like the brief. Do you guys have any questions on flies before I move to hair jigs?
So why can't you pull flies
In a lake?
On lakes because you're creating current.
Yep.
So to speak.
You know, I've tried it. I've tried all sorts of weird shit with flies. I've tried putting like, I've tried doing like 3-ways to like a crankbait and then like a leader, you know, to a fly. I'm like, oh man, that's gonna work. Fly's gonna be like wiggling because the crank, you know what I mean? I've tried it all. I've tried pumping them in lakes. It just doesn't have that same effect that it has in current. I don't know why. And it might even not be so much the action of the fly itself as just the mindset of a fish that's in current compared to a fish that's in the lake. Like those fish that are in current are just so much more of an opportunistic, you know what I mean? They're just like, oh, grab, you know what I mean? Like something's coming by, seize the moment kind of a deal. And I think that's why it works so well. But I can't give you the full answer on why it doesn't. And I'm sure there's guys who have done it and probably caught some fish, but I've just never had any success worthy of doing it over any other known technique in still water. You know what I mean?
Those bucktail flies,
Mhm.
like when are they buoyant enough that they'll float by themselves? Or
No, they would
with the hook,
sink.
Will they sink?
I mean, if you dropped one in the water dry, it might float for a second,
It'll sink real slow.
but it'll sink, yeah.
Because you do have the weight of the hook there.
Okay, and that's enough to
It
take it
depends
down.
upon how much deer hair is on there
I was just
too.
wondering how buoyant they are.
No, I mean,
It depends upon how much deer hair you have on there. The lesser deer hair, because they're hollow, it'll sink more. If you have a lot, it'll just sit there. Especially if you look at the bucktail and you have a lot of fuzzy stuff there at the base of all the individual hairs. If you have that, it might be more waterlogged or it just might not. It won't have the same action. I'll tell you that much.
yeah, it's definitely, I'm not going to say buoyant because it will sink, but it's neutrally buoyant enough that, just that little bit of mono and stuff, when you look at your rig, like from wherever your swivel is to those flies, it's not really a down angle. It's pretty straight, It'll,
Used one, that's why I asked.
yeah. No, I mean, you will like snag bottom sometimes and rocks and stuff for sure. But
They'll sink because trout fishermen use those. I've used those all the time on like floating fly line, and then they've got their mono line going out, or probably fluorocarbon line going down, and it'll actually sink them too.
yeah, I mean, you'll notice a difference. Like if you use fluoro, you'll noticeably be like, oh man, I'm grabbing bottom like a lot. Yep. Yep. And like the heavier the mono you can use, the better. But when you start getting into like 12 and 14, good luck trying to get that loop through the eye of the fly. That's pretty much why I use Trilene XL 10 pound. I found that's pretty much the best kind of compromise of like it's thick enough that it's pretty tough and it's got enough buoyancy, but it's not too thick that you can't get that loop through the eyelid of the fly. Now, once you change that fly, like say like 3-4 times, that front fly, you will start to get a kink in that loop, and then it becomes a lot harder to push that line through the eye because it's just going to want to fold over on itself instead of having the strength to go through. So, there is a shelf life on it. By halfway through the day or whatever, you're probably tying a new leader. But
So back to the weight, you use a stick weight? I mean,
yeah, it's a pencil weight.
Same
Do you have
thing
pencil
for
weights,
bottom
Pat?
bouncing?
Yeah, so he's got some there. Yeah, I got one here, and I can show you later when you come up. But
Pass these around.
basically just like a stick of lead.
That's where you were saying you could.
Yep, with a barrel swivel coming out. So like that's a 1 ounce, and then if I wanted a 1/2 ounce, I'll just take a wire cutter and I'll cut it right in half. Yep. So that's how I do, because then you can trim it a little bit, you know what I mean, and just really fine tune it.
What determines if you're gonna go to a lighter hook, or a lighter sinker?
If I find myself like,
If you get the
let me
snap.
hold the rod. Yeah, if I do this without breaking anything. Here's another trick when you're popping them. I like to get all 4 fingers in front of the reel stem. I'll do like my ring and my pinky finger on the cork and my middle and my pointer finger on the blank. And I'll just hold it just like that because it makes the rod butt heavy then. And so it's tip high and you're not using any wrist power to like hold your rod up. Whereas if you kind of keep it in your cast position, you're using your wrist the whole time to keep that rod up. And like after like 3 hours, it gets kind of tiring. Plus when you got 2 fingers on the blank, you can just feel everything. But so basically I'm sitting here and I'm just kind of like, this is my snap, usually just kind of something like that. Not even, probably like that. If I'm having to like put some arm into it to do it, it's probably too much weight. I'm gonna start cutting it off. Or like when I pop, I feel the weight like drag more than actually like lift up and set back down, probably too much weight. Because you shouldn't have to try hard to do it. With the current pulling on the line, you should just barely have to pop it, and you'll feel it like lift up. It seems weird, but even like with a 1 ounce weight and heavier current, it's easier to snap it than like a 1/2 ounce weight and slack current that's too much weight, and then you're working harder to get that thing to move, because that current pulling on the line is almost like a parachute. And as soon as you give it a little bit of something on the rod, it just kind of lifts the whole thing up and sets it back down. So it's one of those things where you just kind of play with it, you know, and if you feel like, oh, this is way too heavy, you know, trim a little bit off, but just still, you know, kind of remember, stay on that heavy side of, you know, err on the side of heavy than too light. You can always take more weight off. You can't add it without tying a new one on. So don't be like, oh, I'm a little overgunned, and then chop half of it. You know, take a 1/4 or a 1/2 inch and off. Try a cast, see how that feels. You guys got more questions on flies before I go to hair jigs?
What colors do you like for flies?
All of them. Honestly, they all have their moments. They're gonna stick to the same patterns though that any other bait's gonna stick to. Your clear water is gonna be your more natural colors. So like your some type of white or light colored belly with like a blue, a brown, a tan back. You know what I mean? Just that natural minnow pattern. Dirty water, you're gonna start getting into your oranges, your chartreuses. Different systems, there's always colors that just work good. Rock River purple is always good. You get up to like Bago, like the wolf, orange. You know, everybody up there loves red and orange. Chartreuse and black, always, you know, it's like that fire tiger kind of pattern. Works everywhere. But blue and white is one of those, this is like, okay, this is the best tip of the day, remember this. Blue and white is like the best color ever, all the time. Because it's one of the few colors that works equally well in clear and dirty water. Most people don't think about blue and white as being a dirty water color. Blue and white is like one of the first things I'm reaching for in muddy water. Whether that be a fly, a hair jig, a crankbait, a plastic, doesn't matter. Blue and white is just like, if I had to take like the top 3 colors ever for any bait in the world, right? It's gonna be like black and silver, blue and white, fire tiger. Give me those 3, any body of water with any bait, and I'll catch something on it. But blue and white seems to be kind of one of those overlooked colors that people don't use as much as they used to.
Do you like more flasher in them in dirtier water, or does it not seem to make a difference?
Nope. Not, so that's another, glad you brought flash up. So you got your hair. And then you got what we call flash. You guys come up and look at my flies, look at Kurt's flies, you know, you'll see what I'm talking about. There's strands in there that are like, it's like a, I don't know, how would you describe flash, right? Yeah, it's like tinsel, right? There's a bunch of different colors and types of flash. Like there's thin stuff, there's thicker stuff, there's more like holographic, there's more just kind of like sparkly, you know, gold or right. Flash, I always like a little flash in my fly, but you'll see flies where I swear it's like equal flash to hair. You don't want that. You want like minimal, like you want some flash in there, but just a couple strands on each side. You know what I mean? That's like the key. Like it's just enough that, you know, it's just a little bit of a sparkle and a shimmer down there in the water, but you don't want it to like overpower the visual of the bucktail itself. But I have not found any difference in dirty or clean water to the amount of flash. Less is always more for me on flash. And that goes for the jigs and the flies. I don't know why I drew a fly to talk about flash, because I couldn't draw flash. So.
Use different size hooks for your flies?
No, not. I mean, you tie yours on 6s, but you got a different style hook than I like your hooks. They're nice. Yeah. See, I just when I tie mine, I use just a thin wire Aberdeen, and I usually use like a 4. Kurt's tying them on a 6. That's still a really fine light wire, but it's like a 4X strong. Yeah, yours are 6s. But what you don't want is a fly on like a heavy gauge wire hook, right? Because it's the weight. As soon as you start making it heavy, it kind of defeats the whole purpose of the fly. So,
Mine are roughly 2.5 to 3.5 inches long, and I just timed some, and I tease all the small hair fibers out that are probably, if I tie those in for like 1.5 inches that you were talking about using in colder water, I might go down to a size 8, 4XL size 8.
yep, and that's,
A little bit shorter.
I do like, when the water's colder, I like smaller flies. And when I say smaller, I'm talking shorter and overall like just less hair. So the whole profile of it is like, you know, just less. And then as we start getting into that like post-spawn, like right now, then I start to like a longer, fuller fly, just a little bit more of a meal for them. And I haven't found a river system yet where you couldn't catch a fish on a fly. You can get a fish to bite it pretty much every river. But it definitely has systems where it excels a lot more than other systems. And what I've seen to kind of relate it to is systems that have emeralds. You guys know what I'm talking about when I say emeralds? A lake shiner, you know what a lake shiner is? The long, skinny, you know, ones. They're kind of like almost holographic see-through on the side. They're about, you know, anywhere from 2 to like 4 inches. So they're called emerald shiners. Everyone calls them lake shiners. That's a super popular forage fish in a lot of these rivers in the southern part of the state. Anywhere that's got like an emerald population, flies seem to work really well. And it makes sense. I mean, a fly is kind of that same body profile of an emerald. You start getting into systems that have like a gizzard shad population, like a taller profile bait, and then it seems like your plastics are going to outfish your flies because it's just like a meteor, you know, profile that those fish are keyed in on.
So how much flow is there gonna be needed in the water? Like if
I would say if you,
dams periodically, but you still have some flow, do you need to get where?
I would say like if you're drifting, right, and you look at your GPS and just see how, like the speed of the current, you want to be, you know, at a minimum 0.3, 0.4.
Okay.
I like it all the way up to like 1.5. I was throwing flies, last year we had a tournament in the Detroit River. Any of you guys ever been to the Detroit River?
My in-laws would.
That is the fast, I've never seen current like that in my life. Like when you like vertical jig, when you're just drifting and vertical jigging, you're using a 1 ounce. I mean, it's nuts. It is like, it is moving. And I was throwing flies in that. I had a 3 ounce pencil sinker on there to be able to do it. I mean, it was like it was like the size of a marker. It was ridiculous. But they ate it, you know. I think, you know, what makes it so effective pulling or casting it is you got all these guys drifting, right, with a jig and a minnow. And it works. They eat it, right? You can't beat it. It's a jig and a minnow, right? I mean, it's always going to work.
Sure.
But, you know, you have that presentation. Here, you're a fish, right? You're sitting here. Here comes a jig and a minnow. It's like, oh, there it is. Oh, it's gone. You know what I mean? Like, they have to make up their mind pretty quick on whether they're going to eat that, especially if they can only see, you know, this far. It's like, gone. You know, that's all they got. Now you got this fly, right? I'm this fish. I'm sitting here. Here comes this fly from the side, and it's just sitting there. Oh, it moved. Oh, but it's still sitting there. Oh, moved again, still sitting there. They got like 30 seconds, you know, and then they're just like, oh, okay, screw it. You know, they just can't handle it. Like, it's too easy. It's just sitting there, and it's just kind of wiggling. It's like, and because it's such a light, you know, presentation, there's no weight like a jig, right? So, you know, like with a jig and a minnow, when those fish are off, you can feel them kind of like chewing on it. You set the hook, and what do you got? You got a jig with no minnow, you know? They're chewing on the tail of your minnow, you know? With the fly, it's like all they do is like breathe a little bit, and they just engulf it because it weighs nothing. So it just like gets sucked into their mouth, and you just hook them good. You guys ready for jigs?
Yeah.
Okay. So you got, basically when it comes down to hair jigs, there's 3 different jig head styles. No, we're going to say 4. I better do 4. All right, that I like. So first you got your pan head or your current cutter, which is like, it's a horrible picture, but I'm making it big. You got your regular round ball. And I got these up here if you want to come look at them. You got, don't pay attention to my hook size to jig head artistic skills here. Then you've got teardrops. And then you've got, like, some people call them walleye heads, some people call them minnow heads. These usually have an eye on them. So do these. Okay. In a river, in the current cutter, if you looked at it from the top, is like real narrow. The eye up here. Does that make sense? You guys know what I'm talking about? Current cutter jig heads. When I'm fishing a river, anywhere I'm usually throwing flies, I'm throwing the current cutter or the panhead, because you're going to get away with considerably less weight and still maintain the bottom contact that you need because they cut the current so well. Round ball, pretty much only going to fish that slack water. The teardrop, I'll fish both. The walleye head, I'll fish both, but predominantly with the walleye head, slack water. I would pretty much say these are going to be your lakes, and then these are going to be your rivers. Here's the caveat to that. The current cutter, you guys ever fished a shiver minnow? You know what it is? Kind of like a jig and rapala. Real popular walleye bait these days for kind of snapping in the summer. The reason a shiver minnow is so effective is because when you snap it and it jerks forward, it rolls on its side. And so like it just creates this super awesome erratic action underwater. And when that thing snaps and rolls like that, it just like triggers a instinctive bite in those fish's brains. Current cutters do the same thing. So they're super effective in rivers because they cut the current so well and you keep it down near the bottom with less weight. But they're also effective in slack water later in the year. Like I'm talking like midsummer fishing, when you're like starting to get real aggressive with your presentations. Because when you snap a current cutter jig head, it rolls on its side and kind of like glides one way or the other. So it creates a super effective jig head for snapping, but that's, we're talking July, August, early September, like 70+ degree water temps when you're starting to get real aggressive. The teardrop is still like slimmer than like a round ball or a walleye head. So it does cut the current a little better than a current cutter, but still not as good, but good enough that I'll use it in a river. So like if I'm fishing, in a river with less current or more of like a back eddy type scenario, kind of a current seam, and I want a slower fall, because the more drag, the more water drag you have on a jig head, the slower it's going to fall, right? Like when you snap it and it's falling back to the bottom, the more water resistance, it's going to fall slower. So if I want like a real slow fall or more drag, I'm going to fish something like this in a river. These two I'm pretty much always throwing in slack water. Hair jigs in slack water, like in lakes, I would say really, like people have been doing it forever. The last 2 years, a lot of the YouTubers and stuff, like especially in like Green Bay, have kind of been talking about it a lot. So kind of really put it on the map. It's kind of become like the cool, like you remember like 10 years ago when like ripping wraps were like the cool thing to do? Now like hair jigs are the cool thing to do. Which is cool that guys are figuring it out. It kind of sucks because it was kind of nice when you were like the only one doing it. But a hair jig in general, when you're fishing it, you're snapping it. So like the flies, we're doing like slow pops. The hair jigs, I'm giving it a good, foot minimum up off the bottom, sometimes up to 3 feet, a good sweep. And it's more of a reaction bite. And that's what, and it's a reaction bite, but it's a very non-intrusive bait, right? It's not rattling, it's not vibrating, it's not shaking and making a bunch of noise. So like it's darting past them, but it's not spooking them. And so it just creates this super effective technique that works just as good in a lake as it does in a river system. Did you have something? Yeah. Oh, nope, you're good. I would say in general, my hair on my jigs is probably 2 to 3 times as much hair than what I'm going to put on a fly. It's a much bigger profile bait. I also want it longer, right? So I would say in general, you guys can look through all my stuff. For lakes, for rivers, it's pretty close to the same amount of hair volume and length that's going to be on my flies. What you get out of the bigger profile in the lakes is, one, I think it's just a bigger bait fish pattern, which like especially for stuff like Green Bay is great. They want something big up there. 2, it's more hair creates more, like we were talking about, like the buoyancy earlier. So you can, when you're in current, the the current's naturally going to slow your jig down so it falls slower. When you're out in the lake, that same weight jig head, when you snap it, it's going to sink, right, a lot quicker because there's no current pulling on it. So you start adding more hair and create more bulk and buoyancy through the water, and it's going to just slow that sink rate down. You're going to get more hang time. In general, the more hang time you can get on any kind of a bait that you're jigging, you know, the more effective, because 99% of your bites are going to be on that fall during that hang time. That being said, you will get bites on the bottom with a hair jig. A lot of people say like pinning it, like you'll notice you're getting fish like under the chin. There was like debates for years where everyone was like, oh, you're just snagging those fish. Well, now it's, you know, school's out on that. I mean, I watch them on live scope do it all the freaking time. I'll pop my jig and I'll watch that walleye come up and just right on it, you know. So they definitely do, you know, pin it. I don't know if they're trying to eat it or they're just pissed that it's moving and they're like, stop moving, you know. And but they definitely do like chase it and pin it to the bottom. But so like when you're casting hair jigs in lakes, don't be afraid to let it sit on the bottom for not, you know, a while, but like half a second. Like it's not like you got to hit bottom and then like immediately snap again. You give it a second and then you'll go to pull again and it'll just be heavy because he's like, took it on the bottom. Throwing them in lakes is just pretty straightforward. I mean, literally you're just pick your spot where you got your fish and you're just fan casting, right? Just like your bass fishing. Cast, retrieve it, bring it in. Don't give up on your cast. This is one mistake I see a lot of people doing in lakes with a hair jig. Here's your boat. You just casted to here. You're bringing it in, hop, you know. What's happening out here, I'm going to do this different. The farther from the boat you are, your angle from your rod to the bait is like a real mellow angle, right? You get your bait ends up next to the boat, and now your line is like a lot steeper angle. So when you're retrieving your jig out here, you snap it, and it's basically, it's not so much going like this as much as it's kind of going like that. You know what I mean? It's more of a drag than a lift. And then as you get closer to the boat and your line angle starts to get steeper, you're progressively, you know, I'm just doing this super big, but it's getting taller and tall. You know what I mean? It's more vertical than horizontal as you get closer to the boat. There's so many times I will watch, like everything's different now with live scope because we know what, you know, we're not guessing anymore. Like I know, okay, did that fish just come out of nowhere and hit it or was it following me the whole cast? I can't tell you how many times I will cast to a fish 60 feet away. It will follow that hair jig all the way to the boat. And as soon as I get like, say from here to the end of the table from the boat, and now my jig's starting to go more vertical than horizontal, it creams it. Like, I mean, I'll be in 5 feet of water sometimes, there's 8 feet of line out on my rod, and I just give it that one last pop before you're gonna like reel it up and redo it, and that's where you get it, right there. And most of the time when I've watched them on live scope, those fish were on it from the beginning of your cast, and they were just chasing it the whole way, and then all of a sudden your cadence changes a little bit, boom. But I see so many people cast, they'll work their cadence, everything's perfect, they get to about here, burn it in, recast. You're missing half your bites in that last 30 or... In a river with hair jigs, this is where my main current deal, forget everything I told you. So, current's going this way. You got, so like, say current's going this way and you kind of got an inside turn right here. Let's say the shore kind of goes like that a little bit. So you get like a back eddy right here. So that current, you know, everything else is still going this way, but you got that, you know, like kind of a back swirl right there. And then you'll get like, you know, we'll call it a seam right here. Usually a seam is going to have bubbles on it or like white foam in a river. If you steelhead fish at all, you'll hear the term foam is home, right? Like if you see like a foam line or a bubble line, it's always foam is home, cast it. It's always good. But when I'm fishing a hair jig in the river and you've got heavy current here, right, you're going to have less current. It's going to be the same direction, but probably less intensity on an inside bend. and you're gonna have like the same direction but more current on an outside bend of a river. I like hair jigs on an inside bend, less current. It's more of a slack water presentation. It doesn't have to be completely slack, but I want to get out of that main channel current. This is fly territory. This is hair jig territory. Now these back eddies are really good hair jig spots. Usually what I'll do is I'll spot lock the boat out in the main current, and I will cast too short, like touch shore. Bring it across that back eddy part, and it's going to kind of swing your jig this way, and then it's going to hit that seam and start swinging it the other way, and then back to the boat. I'll work this for a couple minutes, slide down, do the same thing, kind of cover your whole way through those back eddies. Super effective with the hair jig. Doesn't work so good with a fly. Don't ask me why. I've tried getting, like putting the boat here and like casting this way and bringing it into the current, through the back eddies. Caught a few fish, but it's not nearly as effective as taking that hair jig and bringing it cross current through those situations like that. I think the main difference is when you have fish out in this main current and you're using flies, you're just bringing it past so many fish, you're getting that kind of just like reaction bite out of them, right? Those are just like staging fish, they're kind of just holding there. When you have fish start working in these back eddies, usually it's for two reasons. One, they're feeding, so they're post-spawn and they're getting in there because there's shiners in there, minnows, they're on the feed, they're looking for a meal. Or a lot of times your bigger hens are going to lay in places like this. So most of your males are going to run up the center, gut of the channel, and your 25, 30-inch hens they're just smarter, honestly, because women are smarter, I'll say it. They'll work the edges. They'll sit in those back eddies. They'll work those inside turns with less current. Like but think about a big hen too that's pre-spawn. She's got like 4 pounds of eggs. She's working a lot harder to get where she's going. She doesn't want to sit out in that main current and fight it. And the males are so pumped up on testosterone, they don't care. They're just excited to go, and they'll sit right in the middle.
So when you're pitching it towards shore, is it just a retrieve, or are you still trying to do?
Still hopping it.
Okay.
Yep.
Still hopping.
I have seen a straight retrieve work with a hair jig at night. Sounds dumb. It shouldn't work, but it does. In De Pere. It's the only place I've seen it work. I've tried it everywhere else. My buddy told me he was getting him on that once. I was like, dude, you're snagging him. I was like, there's no way. And then I took him out in the boat once, and he did. He was like, hey, just take your hair jig, you cast it over here, and you just burn it. He was like, oh, 10-pounder. I'm like, oh my God. Like it blew my mind. We've tried it other places. It does not work at all. There's something about there. It's probably just the only thing there that they've never seen before, So it worked. But every other time, if I'm fishing here, I'm snapping it. Usually, your colder water pre-spawn conditions, I'm doing that like 12-inch pop. You know what I mean? Just like, smaller hops. And it doesn't take much on the rod. Like, 6 inches on the rod tip is probably moving your jig like 12 inches.
So you're saying you want about a foot?
So you want your actual jig to lift about a foot. Yep. And then you start getting into like these post-spawn fish, water's warming up and they're getting aggressive. I mean, I'll go like full rod sweep. Like I'll have the rod like level with the water and I'll sweep it to like vertical. I mean, that jig's going like 4 feet. And then it just gets them fired up. They'll smash it. Pre-spawn on a hair jig, I like to run a stinger hook. Post-spawn, I don't. Post-spawn, they eat so much better. They just choke it down. You don't need it. It's just going to get in your way, and it's just going to, it just ends up so deep in their throat, it's not even worth it. Pre-spawn, like half your fish on the hair jig will be on that stinger hook. And you want to run your stinger. There's a million different brands of stingers out there. You can make your own or buy them. But let's say your hair, is about that long. You want the eye of your treble for your stinger hook like right at the end of your hair. Like if it's up in the hair, it turns into like a balled up mess. And if it's too long, it just looks kind of stupid. But if you can get it to where it's, the eye of the hook is within a 1/4 inch of being right at the back of like your longest hairs, that's perfect. That's right where you want it. Most of the stinger hooks you buy are surprisingly like pretty close. Like they must, they work out 90% of the time, but there is some that are too long. Like the best thing you can do is if you're buying them, like have a hair jig, like whatever kind of hair jig you like to use. And then most of the stinger hooks are in a package with like the leaders laid out so you can see how long they are. So take a hair jig and then take the package and just lay up the different brands, see which one's gonna work with the hair jig that you like. And then that's the one you want. It doesn't take a big treble either. Don't feel like you need a number 4 on there, like a 10 or a 12, something little. That's all you need. Sometimes I think the stinger hook almost looks better on the hair jig than not because it almost looks like you've got this bulk body of like your minnow shape, and then that treble hook almost looks like a tail. Like, and it just kind of really, it fits. Like I've never noticed I've gotten less bites because I've had a stinger hook on there. I don't think I get more either, but it doesn't seem to affect the fish catching ability of it at all. What it does affect is if you're like in super rocky conditions, you'll snag more. If you got a lot of leaves and junk on the bottom, you're gonna pick up crap most of the time on that stinger hook. So even pre-spawn, like if it's super leafy, slimy, nasty bottom, I usually take it off just because it's not worth dealing with it every cast. But if you can get away with it, run it.
Using live bait with hair jigs?
Never. Nope. I am not a bait with hair person. So okay, I'll take that back. Never casting it, right? Snapping it. There are situations where I will drift and vertical jig with a hair jig. Then I'm going to put a minnow on it most of the time. But we're talking like super lame negative fish where like you're vertical jigging, like you don't even move, like you hit bottom, bring it up, stop. That's it, all day long. You know what I mean? Just like the super early conditions where like you're doing nothing, but you want like, let's say dirty water. Sometimes I'll use a hair jig over just a regular jig because it's just more of a visual, right? It's just more of a target for him to see. But I'm still going to put that minnow on there. But I would say, I guess, so I guess technically that's hair jig fishing because you're using a hair jig, but I wouldn't call that hair jig fishing. You know what I mean? Like if you're fishing a hair jig, you're casting it, you're snapping it, you're working it. If you're doing that, you're vertical jigging. You just happen to be using a hair jig instead of a regular jig, but you're still just vertical jigging. So, any other hair jig questions?
Do you use a leader, the knot, or
Oh yeah, so
swivel, or?
I run braid on pretty much all my spinning rods, still 10-pound braid. If I'm gonna throw a hair jig, I'm gonna run a Alberto knot. You guys know what that is? You know what an Albright knot is? So an Alberto is just this is gonna be YouTube it. YouTube's the best, but basically. Okay, this is your leader. I'm usually going to run, if I want it to sink slower, like a longer fall, I'm going to use mono. If I want it to get down, like in heavier current, I'm going to use fluoro. It's going to be anywhere from like 6 to 12 pound. I will not fish Green Bay with less than a 12-pound leader. Not when you know you catch a 14-pounder in any cast. I'm not going to risk it. And those fish don't care. They'll bite 20 if you tied it on. So this is your leader though, your mono or your fluoro. And then you take your braid from your rod. You go through. So you take your leader, you fold it over. So you got a loop end. You go through this loop. You wrap it around like 8 times. However many times I just drew, I didn't count. If you were going to do an Albright knot, from this step right here, you would take it, go back up, go back through this loop the opposite way that this line is going through, and grab both of these ends and both your braid ends and wet it and cinch her down. That's an Albright knot. An Alberto knot is essentially the same thing, except before you go back, you're going to wrap it 8 more times on the way back up. And then you're still going to go through the opposite way, grab all 4 and pull it tight. It's still a super slim, it really doesn't bulk up the profile that much. It's still a super slim knot, but it's like 40% stronger. Yeah. They got a new one now called an FG knot. I'm a knot nerd. I think I will spend like 2 hours watching knot YouTube videos. And guys will like get crazy. They'll take like different lines and different brands and tie all the knots, and then they'll put weights on them and they'll strength test them. You know what I mean? It gets nuts. But they got this one now that all the saltwater guys are running. A lot of the bass guys are switching to. It's called the FG knot. I don't know how to tie it yet because I've only like just started screwing around with it. But supposedly that is the new like beats every other knot.
I use it in saltwater,
Do you?
but I haven't tried it on walleye sizes. You need to have the disparity between your leader and your main line.
Is it? Do you think it's like a? Do you think it's like a bulkier thing on your line, or is it still pretty low pro?
Very low pro. It's the lowest profile of any knot that you're.
So you can still cast it, you know, through your guides.
Go right through your eyes.
Yeah.
Which is nice. In fact, in double uni, when you got a 30-pound leader, it's just banging the tip of the
Right.
pole. This does it.
Did it? Do you think it's any quicker to tie?
God no.
It's because it looks. Yeah. Because I was watching videos on it. I was like, oh man, I'm not ready for this yet. It was.
That one in the dark, though, you don't need to see it.
Right.
Yeah, it's not very hard to do.
Yeah. I
It
just.
takes more time.
I haven't switched. I've been doing the Alberto for long enough now. I can do it with my eyes closed, so it's hard to get me to switch now. You know.
Tension on that FG where the Alberto, you can have slack on
But
that.
you can
Right.
do the tension on your rod, you can do the tension in your teeth, you can do the tension anywhere. And literally, in the dark, you can tie.
So now I'm gonna go home and learn the frickin' FG knot tonight. Now is what I'm gonna do.
Yeah, it works. Okay. I have it.
How are you guys? Any more hair jig questions?
Just on leader leg.
Like 2 to 4 feet. I usually start with 4, and then as I retie jigs or whatever, when it gets down to about 1.5 to 2 feet, that's when I'm usually gonna chop it and restart. And you could run, like in dirty water, you could probably go straight braid. The reason I never go straight braid, because there's plenty of situations when fish will bite your bait straight braid, like they don't care. I like the stretch of that leader. That's like your bungee cord. So when you get close to the boat and those fish are kind of shaking their head, you know, that 4-foot leader has probably like 8 inches of stretch to it. And when you take that away with the braid, you find you'll lose a lot more fish because they're just, you know, there's nothing to give a little bit, you know, and they can just pull the hook easier.
Do you ever use like a small swivel for prevent line twists?
Not like jigging, not with a hair jig. You know, it definitely helps with the flies sometimes with fish rolling and stuff. You know, that's why I always like a swivel. And when I'm doing that, and I'll show you whoever wants to come up with, when I'm doing that swivel, you know, for the fly leader, tiny. Like that, the lighter, the better. You start getting, you know, the bigger 3-ways and the bigger swivels. It's just more heavy, bulky stuff that's just eating up more of that sensitivity in the system. And it's just everything you add, you know, with weight, even if it's just minuscule, is like that much less sensitivity you have to the actual bait and the bite. Well, I'd say whoever wants to see me tie the leader up, come up and we'll do one.
Before we're going to do a little prize giveaway here. If you got here late or something, and you didn't write your name on a little raffle ticket, put it in the bucket, do that, and we'll do the raffle thing here in just a minute.
This stuff's called hydroturf. People use it for like flooring in their boat. And I bought a bunch of it to do a John boat, and I had a bunch left over, and it's like the perfect, you know, because it's just like a 3M back. You just peel the backing and sticks. Oh man, you can like shake them around and they're not coming out of it. It works so good. You can buy like 4x4 foot squares of it on Amazon for like $30, and you just cut it with a scissors to fit your boxes.
And what is it called?
It's called hydroturf.
Okay.
But you know, I got friends that they've had really good luck going to Walmart and buying yoga mats, and then they hot glue yoga mats in, and because the yoga mat's like pretty tough, and they've had good luck with that